Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. This is the second video of my 3-part Intro to 251s series, and if you didn't see the first part where I talk about how to actually identify and build and play a 251, you can check that out using the link in the description below. I highly recommend watching that one first before this one, especially if you're still newer to 251s and you want to know what exactly is a 251. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to start building 251 lines in your playing. When I mean lines, I just mean how do you actually construct a melodic line through the chord changes of a 251. This is a topic that I get asked about all the time. Should you memorize licks? Should you create your own lines? Should you just transcribe? Should you just play random stuff until, something sticks and it sounds okay? Well, you can go about it a bunch of different ways, but if you're newer to 251s and you just want to know how to build your own lines and then go from there and do whatever you want with 251s, this is going to be the video for you. And I'm gonna make it simple and concise so you can start practicing this right away. Right before I dive into it, there is another PDF worksheet that goes along with this specific video. You can get access instantly and free to that PDF using the link at the top of the description down below, so make sure you grab that. This is different than the PDF worksheet that I included with the last video in part 1, so make sure that even if you have that one, you still grab this one for this video. Now, speaking of that worksheet, I'm gonna dive inside. All right, so as you see here in the PDF, at the top left, it says treble clef. There are two different versions of this PDF, a treble clef and a bass clef version. Make sure you have the one in front of you that is appropriate for your instrument. But for this, I'm going to be using treble clef because that's the instruments that I play, and that's what most of you will probably be playing on. You'll notice it's called How to Build 251 Lines. And a quick disclaimer before we get into this. No, this isn't the only way to do it. There are many different ways to do it. And no, this doesn't go into every different way to build lines. There are quite literally an infinite number of ways you can build different lines and build melodies through any set of chord changes, and specifically 251. But I'm kind of breaking it down, so if you're just starting out and you want a simple and concise way, this is going to be the way for you. Like I said in the previous video in part 1, there's so many different videos and so many different things out there online that if you search how do I play a 251 on the internet, you're going to find so many different resources that may be good, may not be good. They might conflict with one another. So what I'm going to do is distill all of that down and just give you what you need to know. So just as a review, I'm just giving you what the notes and the chords are for a long 251 in C major. I call it a long 251 because it's a full measure of the 2 chord, full measure of the 5 chord, full measure of the 1 chord. There is something called a short 251 where it's half that length. I'm talking about the long 251 exclusively here just because it's easier to kind of visualize. It's easier to practice, I think, and it can give you better ideas to actually hear the chords and get through them versus if you only had 2 beats to do it. So that's why I'm doing it. So if you don't know what a 251 is, go back, watch the first video, and the review is here. So now let's dive into it. When building your own lines, and in this video, I'm gonna talk about how you're gonna take your own skills that you already have and build lines. Not have to transcribe some crazy John Coltrane line or something. That could be cool. But here is gonna be, take the knowledge you know about 251s that you learned in the previous video, and now how do I actually use that knowledge to improvise through? Well, if you look right here, line number 1, quarter notes and chord tones only. So for this first example, I'm only going to be playing quarter notes for the rhythm to make the rhythm simple, and I'm only going to be using chord tones. That means over the D minor 7, I'm only going to be using D, F, A, C, over the G7, G, B, D, F, and over the C major 7, C, E, G, B. Here's what this line sounds like. Just to break this down for you, this is a very common line. It's very simple to play. I'm basically going up the 2 chord. I literally play the chord in root position, 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. And then I have this nice little motion here, and that's always great to do. I'll get into voice leading later, but if you have a note in this chord that's really close to a note in the next chord, that's going to be a great idea to use. Call that voice leading, neighbor tones, all these different things, but just basically moving from one chord to the other without having to do a big skip. So I go to the 3rd here, and then I literally just go down from there. So the 3, the 1, the flat 7, and the 5. And that once again puts me right next to this note, this landing note of E as the 3rd. I could have landed on C if I wanted to. I could have jumped up or jumped down. I just decided to land on the 3rd because I love landing on the 3rd, as you'll see. And it was right next to it, so it works beautifully. There are a bunch of different ways that you can take quarter notes and chord tones only and create different lines. So in the section where I give you space to write your own lines, or if you have your own paper to write them down, try a bunch of different ways to take just quarter notes, just chord tones, and create different lines by putting those parameters on yourself. And that's what this video is kind of sneakily all about. It's about putting parameters on yourself and putting rules down to then make yourself think through it and be a little more creative. I know it's kind of counterintuitive. More rules, more creative. Well, there's this thing called paralysis by analysis. If I just said, use any chord, any substitution, any of the 12 notes, any range, now create a line. Well, but if I say, okay, you can only use these chord tones and only use this rhythm, how creative can you be? How can you go outside of that and say, okay, you're giving me these rules, so I have these parameters. How can I then use other elements, maybe skips, maybe repeated notes, maybe, I don't know, something else to create a line? And that's where you can kind of really start to think your way through these lines when you actually put parameters on your practicing. So now I have line number 2, and see this says still using quarter notes and chord tones. So I basically wrote a different line. And if you really look closely, you'll see that I just inverted the first 4 notes. I go down the D minor 7 chord, I go C, A, F, D, just backwards from root position. And then this next measure and the resolving measure is the exact same as line 1. Here's what line 2 sounds like. So you can hear that just by changing up those first 4 notes and the angle of the attack of the line going down instead of going up, it gives a different feel. Is it better? Is it worse? That's up to you to decide. If you like it one way or the other, go with that and explore that further. Maybe have bigger skips. Maybe, start higher up, start lower, whatever. The idea is take some of these ideas and concepts that you already understand about chord tones, about rhythms, simple rhythms, and then branch out from there without allowing yourself to just use any note or any rhythm right now. All right, so line number 3, once again, still using quarter notes and chord tones. So now I keep the same first 4 notes as line number 2, where I just go down the D minor 7 chord, but instead of jumping up, I actually just go down to the 3rd here of the G7, and then go up the chords, so the 3, the 5, the flat 7, the 1, and I resolve 3 here again. So once again, I'm still just playing the 4 chord tones, but I'm approaching it now in a different direction. Here's what line 3 sounds like. And now for the last line on the first page, we have line number 4. Once again, still using quarter notes and chord tones. So this is the first one where I just don't play all 4 chord tones of each of the chords. You'll notice here I only use the 5, the 3, the 7, then back to the 5. I don't play the root at all. And you'll notice when you hear it, it kind of bounces back and forth instead of just going in one direction, which gives a different sound once again. And then here I have this nice little motion from the A up to the B. Once again, if you have a note in this chord that's close to a note in this chord, use them right next to each other. Neighbor tones are great. Leading tones are awesome. Then I have the 3 here, jump up to the 5, back to the 1, back to the 5, to the 3. So I don't play the 7 here over the G7 chord. Is that okay? Sure. Now, when listening to this, if you don't like it, don't use it. Try something else. The idea is you're going to try a bunch of different ideas here, and we're still just using quarter notes and chord tones. You're going to see how crazy you can get with it and what you like. So here's what line number 4 sounds like. All right, if we jump down to page 2, now we're going to vary what we've already written. So if you wrote out maybe 4 lines or 2 lines or 10 lines, at the end I give you a little spot to write a couple lines down, but that's not the be all end all. I just wanted to give it on this sheet so you had it. But if you have some blank staff paper or some notation on the computer, you can write out a million lines if you want. What we're going to do now is vary each of those lines. This is why it's great for you to have the PDF, because then you can compare them back to back. So now what I'm going to do is vary the rhythms and other non-note musical elements. When I say non-note musical elements, I'm talking rhythm, dynamics, articulation. But when you're writing out lines, you might write the articulation, you might not. When you play it, you'll definitely use that. But really, I'm focusing more on the rhythmic alteration with what I did before. So I take line 1, it was only quarter notes. Now I'm going to take the basic shape and notes of the line, but I'm going to change the rhythm. So here's what the variation on line number 1 sounds like. All right, so you see here, the biggest thing that I did was I added a lot of syncopation. Upbeat, 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 right? So instead of boo, 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 ba, ba, I play do, dot, 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 da do da da, right? Obviously the pitches aren't there, but rhythmically, I'm placing everything almost on the upbeat now to really vary it from the original, which was all downbeats. That's a great way to start variations, is just shift some notes over a half a beat, a little early, a little late, but displacing rhythm things like that is a great way to change up your lines. Now, I want you to listen to the variation on line number 2. Okay, as you see here, I don't even start on the downbeat. I have a rest on the downbeat of 1. I start on the upbeat here. Then I kind of play down. I skip back up. I have a dotted quarter note here on the end of 1 to kind of hold it out a little bit. A little staccato here using some non-note musical elements of articulation. Ending on the end of 4 again, that kind of leads into the downbeat there. Once again, it's the same overall shape, but I'm displacing some of those rhythms using syncopation, holding notes a little longer, playing eighth notes, things like that. It's a great way to change up your rhythms. All right, now we're at line number 3, and here's what this variation sounds like. All right, this one, I wait until the end of 2 to start playing. Look at that, I start with a quarter rest and an eighth rest, and then I just play an eighth note line going down. So that's another way to change rhythms from quarter notes to eighth notes, is to just play all eighth notes and displace it. You'll have to wait a couple beats or play a couple beats early, but instead of just quarter notes, you can just run some eighth notes, and then you have options with either rests or held notes, as you see here in the second measure where I play a dotted quarter, and then I jump up, and then once again, I'm hitting the end of 4 a lot here as a resolution, because I really like that instead of waiting till beat 1 of the resolution chord to resolve. So think about that. Just mess around with some of these resolutions as well as the lines. All right, and now for the final one on the second page, this is the variation on line number 4, and here's what it sounds like. Okay, you can see that I once again started on the upbeat, but then I instantly hit a downbeat here, and then go back to some syncopation in the middle. So I hope you enjoy the way I kind of vary between downbeats in this one and upbeats. It's just not all the same, and I think that variation is what kind of keeps it sounding pretty cool. But once again, the notes are based off of that original line number 4 that I wrote, which was only quarter notes. By the way, before I move on, I just want to let you know that you don't have to vary everything when you're doing these variations, especially if you're more beginner, building your own lines, you've never really done this before, and you want to write a quarter note line first. You don't have to just start altering every single note in every rhythm. Maybe just add a little syncopation at the end. So that very first line, instead of do, 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 right, 8 eighth notes and a whole note, you could just make it quarter, 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 eighth, eighth, and just do something at the end of the line there. And just that can give you that variation and give you that more complexity to the line and just make it feel better to play and better to listen to. You don't have to go crazy altering everything. That process that I just went through of playing just quarter notes, just chord tones, everything's still diatonic and only chord tone based, then adding variations of rhythm and other non-note musical elements, that right there, you can spend a ton of time on. You can go through it in a million different ways and see how far you can push it. Do 2 octave jumps and a lot of repeated notes and this and that, and especially when you start altering the rhythm, do triplets, 16th notes, go wild with it if you want. You don't have to just do a couple and move on. You can really dig in and see how far you can go with one simple original line. But for sake of time for this video, I'm going to move on to the next page and talk about what I call the survival line. All right, now we're into page 3, and we're going to move on to something that I like to call the survival line. I call it that because it's a line that can really help you just survive the chord changes sometimes, because it's a really simple line to use, but it works really, really well. And if you know your major scales, you will be able to play this line, and it works soloing over chord changes. The reason why it works is it literally is just a descending major scale in the key of the 1. So in this case, we have a 2-5-1 in C major. So you're gonna play a C major, but you have to know where you're starting. So if you have a long 2-5-1 like this, which a full measure of the 2, full measure of the 5, we're gonna hit the 3rd of this chord here. So the 3rd of D minor, and then you just scale down diatonically, F, E, D, C. Then you're gonna hit the 3rd, it lands right on the 3rd of the 5 chord, B, A, G, F, and then it ends up landing on the 3rd of the 1 chord. I also wrote in here that you have a little 7-3 motion if you wanna get a little deeper into voice leading. That's a great way to voice lead through changes, is 3rds and 7ths, which I'm gonna get to on page 4. But that is built into the survival line. So if you ever have a 2-5-1 in a song and you're like, oh, I don't know what to play, oh, it's in a hard key, start on the third of the 2 chord and just scale down until you hit the third of the 1 chord, and it will work really, really well. Here's what this exact survival line sounds like. All right, that's great and all, but can we vary the rhythm on this? Absolutely. So right here, as you see, I wrote a rhythmic alteration on the survival line. Once again, there's a million, billion, trillion different options for rhythmic alterations on this line, but I just wrote out one here because this is something that you might want to write out. And here's what the rhythmic alteration on the survival line sounds like. If you notice, I still stay very strict to the descending nature of the line. F, E, D, C, B, A, G, F, E. The only thing I really changed note-wise was I repeated the first F as 2 eighth notes instead of a quarter note or instead of a single eighth note. Besides that, I literally just played all the notes in order, 1 note each. Now, though, I want to get into a rhythmic and note alteration. Now, when I say note alteration, we're still staying diatonically. We are not in this entire video leaving the key of C major. Okay, you will see no sharps, no flats in this entire video. In the next video, in part 3, yes, we're going to be talking about alterations and actually changing notes that go kind of outside of the key and outside of the chords in a very structured way that'll sound really cool. But for now, we're staying diatonic. So here's what the survival line sounds like with note and rhythm alteration, diatonic to C major. So you notice that I still started on the third here, I hit the third here, and I resolved to the third here. So all of the thirds are there, okay? Now I did approach this 7 to third with the C to B, but I didn't approach the G7 going to C major, 7 to 3. This is actually the 5, but it's still right next to it, still sounds good, but really the main thing is hitting the third of each chord. So when you're going down this line, you know, I have some different shapes to the line. I have some different rhythms. It's mostly eighth notes. There's 1 quarter note in there. But I think this is a really good example of how you can take a very simple quarter note line in major scale and start adding on to it. Like I said, in the third part of this series, in the final video, I'm going to be doing some note alterations, and I will go back to some of these lines that I've played in parts 1 and 2 and show you how just by changing some of the notes of those exact lines, you can create even more color and even more melody in your playing. All right, and finally, we are at page 4, where I talk about some voice leading. I talk about 3-7-3 voice leading and 7-3-7. It's called that because literally we're going to talk about the chord tones, the third leading to the 7th, leading to the third. So that's where you get 3-7-3. The reason why I chose this, 1, thirds and 7ths are going to give you the most quality to any 7th chord. It tells you if it's major, minor, dominant, all those things. Thirds and 7ths have the most color. They're going to be really good notes to use when you're improvising. And why specifically 3-7-3? Well, in the survival line was 3-3-3. Now we're going to voice lead close together. So if you notice in a 2-5-1, if you play the third, like you see here with D minor, the note is F. If you voice lead that to the 7th of the 5 chord, it's the same note. And this is not just for C major. Any 2-5-1, the third of the 2 chord is going to be the same as the 7 of the 5 chord. And then all you have to do is go down a half step from there to get to the third of C major. So you have F, F, E. Here's what these 3 notes sound like over top of a track playing the 2-5-1. Now, when we have the 7-3-7, it's the same process, but we're going to start with the 7, voice lead through the 3, and then resolve on the 7. Here's what this sounds like over top of the track. Personally, I like the 3-7-3 more because to me, when you resolve to the third, especially of this 1 chord here, it sounds really, really stable to me. I just like it more. You might like resolving to the 7 more, in which case you should focus more on the 7-3-7. Both are valid, both work really well. I'm just giving you these different options when you're starting your 2-5-1 journey. All right, now I have a couple sample lines using 3-7-3 and 7-3-7. I even wrote here where I hit those chords. So I hit the third of the D minor right on the downbeat. I anticipate a little bit here on the end of 4 with the 7, but it still counts. And then I resolve at the end of the third. So here's what this sample line sounds like. Okay, now I'm gonna ask you a question and you have to answer it completely honestly. If I just played you that line and didn't tell you what I was thinking of, like voice leading or whatever, would you know that I was thinking about a specific voice leading concept like 3-7-3? What do you think? I don't know. And you might have heard it and you might, be able to pick that out. But I know personally, I probably wouldn't have heard that. If you just played me this line and say, what concept was I thinking of? I would probably say something like, I don't know, you just like stayed diatonically and hit the chords and resolved on the third. I would probably hear you resolved on the third, but I wouldn't really pick out that it was 3-7-3 specifically. And that's the magic of thinking this way, is that we're kind of putting a framework there, and then you're working and being creative around the framework. We know the framework works. We know that if you hit thirds, it's going to work. If you go 3-7-3, it will work. Then you just kind of fill in the gaps in between in any way you want. And this is why I structured this video in the way I did, where we just talked about chord tones first, just quarter notes, so you can get a basis of that harmony. If you combine that now with voice leading and then start varying rhythms and other non-note musical elements, that's how you really start building your own lines. Sure, we can talk about transcription and how to actually use that in your playing, but to me, that's a completely separate topic and concept that I think is incredibly important, and I will make another video in the future about how to use transcription in your playing and how to go about that aspect. But from just a sense of seeing chords on a page, maybe playing a melody, and you want to improvise through it and you're kind of lost, this is the starting point for you. And for the final sample line, I have 7-3-7. So this one, you notice I start on the and of 1 with the 7. I hit the third right on the downbeat, and then I go to the 7 on the downbeat. But you notice I start up, come way down, go back up, and here's what this one sounds like. Once again, if I just played that line for you up front and said, what was I thinking of? Would you be able to tell that I was thinking specifically of a framework of 7-3-7? Maybe, maybe not. I know I wouldn't, but that's just me. Maybe you would hear it. All right, so for the final page, page 5 of the PDF, it's called Write Your Own. Now, I didn't give you a ton of space to write a million different lines here, but you could photocopy this a bunch or print it out a bunch, or you can just use your own paper. But I just wanted to kind of give you a space, especially connected to the PDF, where you can write your own. So in the beginning, I have the quarter notes with chord tones only, and I give you 2 chances there of 2-5-1s. Then I wrote chord tones only with the varied rhythms. So you can vary the rhythms of the lines that you just wrote above. Then we have the survival line variation. I didn't have you write out the survival line again. Just write your own variations on that. Then look here, we have a 3-7-3. Maybe write out a couple lines on 3-7-3. And then finally 7-3-7. Write out a couple lines that work over 7-3-7 using that voice leading. And once again, I wrote space for 2-5-1s on each of these. If you want to write 100, write 100. If you want me to supply some blank staff paper, or at least a template for you to print out, let me know and I'll include that. But I just wanted to put this at the end of the PDF so you have a space there where the chord changes are already written out and you kind of have a guide of which line to write where. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate your support. In this series about 2-5-1s, with the first video talking about what is a 2-5-1, how to build one, and in this video talking about how to build lines over the 2-5-1s, and the next one where I talk about different alterations and substitutions and things you can add to the 2-5-1s, my goal is to demystify this idea of 2-5-1s and how you should approach it. Everything that I teach is based on something that I've either experienced when I was learning, playing, or when I was teaching or seeing other people teach. I've seen so many people in person and online teach in a variety of different ways, both good and bad, but it's always so complicated for people when they're first starting out, especially now. As I'm filming this in 2023, there are thousands of videos about how to improvise over jazz songs and jazz chord changes online. And if you're a beginner starting out, I know I would get so overwhelmed if I went online and I said, how do I solo over 2-5-1? Million videos pop up. How do I do this? Million videos pop up. Well, where do you start? Do you go with the one with the most views, the most this? I don't know. And once again, I'm adding to that, yes, but what I'm trying to do is distill all of that down and really make it simple, really make it concise, really make it efficient for you when you're practicing. If you know anything about me, you know that I love being efficient and not wasting time, specifically on the instrument. So I want to do the same thing for you. I hope this video has been helpful for you when you're starting to build your own 2-5-1 lines. Please let me know in the comments down below what you think of this video and how the lines are going for you if you're attempting to do this on your own. Once again, don't forget to grab the free PDF worksheet. using the link at the top of the description below. I'll also put that in the pinned comment. Thank you so much for getting to this point in the video, and I'll see you in part 3.